1992's Reservoir Dogs, the film that put Quentin Tarantino on the map, but also the film that you could not legally buy on video cassette in the UK for 2-3 years after its initial release. Let's get into the story of Reservoir Dogs.
Stories. We would be honoured if you would join us.
Written and directed by Quentin Tarantino and starring, you probably know, Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Tierney, Michael Madsen. Who else do you have? Eddie Bunker in there, Kurt Baltz, Randy Brooks, David Steen, and Stephen Wright as the voice of DJ K. Billy. So it's fairly well known that the Quentin Tarantino origin story, and this is right in the heart of it, saw him working at a video store in California. That video store was called Video Archives, and he sat there writing screenplays. And some of those screenplays he had some luck with. I'll be name checking True Romance, Natural Born Killers a little bit later. But for the purposes of this story, there was one that he wrote in particular that he realised, he wrote it knowing it could be made for a very modest price. It could be made for about $30,000. He could actually direct that himself. He could could he raise the money to film it in 16mm, perhaps black and white, but at least get a film that he's directed out into the world? And so this, the first script was said to have written in October 1990. He handwrites his scripts as well. He's talked about this a lot. He also has his own podcast that sometimes sits below mine on the UK podcast chart. I just thought I'd mention that. Yeah, I'm sure he's very, very worried. But it was a friend of his, Lawrence Bender, who said, you know what, there's more to this script than a $30,000 movie. And Tarantino's just like, okay, yeah. And the path was set to trying to raise $1 million or $2 to do it with a bit more size to it, really. Not on 16mm, on 35mm, to be able to shoot it in colour, to get this film out into the world. And over the ensuing 6-8 months, started all coming together. The story moves so fast that within 8 months of writing the script, Tarantino had been accepted into the Sundance Institute Directors Workshop. And so he wasn't too far away from shooting the movie at this point. And he took some actors along, and not all of the judges at that Sundance workshop were particularly on the side of the film. But Tarantino has always said that it was invaluable, really, the advice he got from Terry Gilliam. So Terry Gilliam was there and offering mentoring and support. Another director there at the point, John Amiel. Did he do Copycat? John Amiel also offering support. But it was Gilliam who was finishing up The Fisher King who gave Tarantino the vital advice. So he asked Gilliam, how do I do the film? And Gilliam said, what you have to understand as a director is you don't have to do everything. That your job is to hire talented people who can do lots of the other jobs on the film. So you hire a cinematographer who can get the look and the quality of the image that you're after. You get a costume designer who can get you the colours and can get you the clothing that you need. And, you know, the flamboyance sometimes, as Tarantino once said. Your job, Gilliam explained to Tarantino, is articulating to them what you want on the screen. Well, it was a light bulb moment for Tarantino. He's talked about it in lots of interviews, in that he could suddenly wrap his head around how to direct a feature film. Now he knew he didn't have to do all of that stuff. There was a way that he could push this forward. The coming together of the film, though, was not without challenges, not least in the casting department. So the original casting, for instance, I mean, Reservoir Dogs, I'm sure if you're listening, watching, you're relatively familiar with this, but you've got this bunch of characters, Mr. White, Mr. Orange, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Pink, Mr. Blue, Mr. Brown. And the setup of the film is they're reuniting after a botched diamond robbery. But it's quite a big cast, really, for an independent film that was going to cost in the end, $1 million, $2 million at best. That was all they could really hope to raise, probably less than that. So you go through some of the original casting options that they were looking at for the film. Well, Tarantino knew he was going to be in it. I mean, he was down as Mr. Pink at one point. He would end up being Mr. Brown. Steve Buscemi, and I'll come to how he got involved in a second. Well, could he be Nice Guy Eddie? That would go to Chris Penn in the end. Lawrence Bender, there's your producer. He could have been Nice Guy Eddie as well, couldn't he? James Woods was famously sent the script, and his agent turned it down without showing it to his client. His client, once he saw the final film and realised what had happened, duly fired said agent. Michael Madsen came in. He auditioned for Mr. Ping. Samuel L. Jackson, Ving Rhames, who obviously both go on to work with Tarantino, were both close to the film at one point. Robert Forster was said to have auditioned. There was a newspaper report, and only one that I could find, I tracked it down via the AFI website, that listed Christopher Walken in the cast at one point as well, but that was never to be, really. The finance was fluctuating as well. Again, it wasn't going to cost very much to make, but they still needed to raise that money. That they didn't have $1 million lying around in their back pocket. And so the break they needed was to get a name. If they could attract a name to the film, well, it might grease some of the wheels. So Lawrence Bender and Quentin Tarantino both wanted Harvey Keitel to take on the role of Mr. White. Now, Mr. White, in terms of screen time and days shooting, wasn't that huge a role. I mean, it's a very ensemble movie, but it was kind of juicy role that an actor might really like to get their teeth into. They didn't have a direct link, or so they thought, to Harvey Keitel, but they did have an indirect one. Because this is how the movies work sometimes. This is why I love doing these little film stories. That Lawrence Bender, at this point, happened to be taking acting classes. And the acting class was being led by a man called Peter Flor. Now, Peter Flor was discussing with Tarantino and Lawrence Bender, well, who do you want in your film? And amongst the names mentioned to them, Harvey Keitel. Well, Peter Flor, by his ex-wife, had a link to Harvey Keitel. And so the script was passed around, got to Keitel. Harvey Keitel read it. This was the era he was doing, The Piano, Bad Lieutenant. He read it and he loved it. But he didn't just want to be in it. He was going to help get this made. That he would also take on, if wanted, a producer role on the film. That might help grease some of the wheels as well. Furthermore, he put up a little bit of money too to basically put on a New York casting session for the movie. That it was Keitel. Keitel had been working on Thelma and Louise for Ridley Scott, and that's where he come across Michael Madsen. So he recommended Michael Madsen, for instance. Chris Penn sees Harvey Keitel's interested. It's just like, all right, now I'm interested. And Keitel's name attracts more funding. So the budget goes from the original $30,000, then they got it to about $100,000 to $1.5 million. Absolute zero, really, in the scheme of modern movies. However, for what Tarantino was looking to do, well, all of a sudden, it could be done. David Duchovny, incidentally, auditioned. He was linked to it for a while. And the cast came together. That Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, who came by the New York route as well. That's how they got him into the film. And I mean, it's interesting looking at the legacy of it as well, that the writing of the Harvey Keitel role would be quite influential on independent film going forward. That you look at a film like Good Will Hunting, and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon wrote that film and won Oscars for writing that film as well. But they looked at the Reservoir Dogs model and figured they needed to write into the Good Will Hunting script a juicy role for a name actor. A supporting role wouldn't take much time, but a good supporting role. And they did it because of Reservoir Dogs, lured Robin Williams to Good Will Hunting. Good Will Hunting wins his Oscar for that film, big hit. But, that was the impact of Reservoir Dogs casting. July 1991 then, in Los Angeles, a 5-week shoot gets underway. A very, very hot Los Angeles. It should be noted at that point. And Tarantino was not awash with resources to work with when shooting the film. In fact, most of the film was shot in the same empty building. That top location scout work, they found an empty building where they could use a couple of different rooms in different ways. So, for instance, a room towards the top of the building would double up as the apartment of Mr. Orange, Tim Roth. But the main use of the building used to be a mortuary. And so, I mean, you look around in the background, there might be one or two clues to that. Almost all of the film was shot indoors at this location in the midst of a very, very hot Los Angeles summer. The location was not particularly well ventilated either. And then you bring in the huge lights or the very hot lights that are required for shooting a film. And the place was heating right up. Tim Roth told a story about the fake blood used in Reservoir Dogs was, I mean, it was basically turned into glue when it heated up, and he found himself stuck to the floor. There was, I mean, there was also, it's worth noting, the costumes weren't on the cool side. They were hardly walking around in Bermuda shorts and t-shirts. They had to wear suits with these heavy lights on. I mean, it wasn't the most comfortable of places to shoot a film. Also, the first week was problematic. That Lawrence Teeny who plays Joe, was getting the wrong side of people's nerves. It was a very, very difficult first week with a lot of arguments and to and fro. There's lots of stories as to why Lawrence Tierney was how he was that you can go and find. But the bottom line here is at the end of the first week, Tarantino just fired him and earned a round of applause for doing so. He would change his mind in the end and bring him back in to finish the bits of the film, but Tierney was winning himself very few friends at all. In terms of the bit of the film that they didn't have to shoot, well, that was the robbery itself. That, as much as Reservoir Dogs is centered around a heist, the idea, the gimmick, I wouldn't call it gimmick actually, but the core idea is you don't see the heist. You see a bit of the before, you see the after of it as well. And it was a twofold choice there. So on the one hand, they just couldn't afford to film it. They didn't have the budget to do it if Tarantino wanted to. Maybe they could have gone and rattled tins, don't know. But also, Tarantino didn't necessarily want to. That he liked the ambiguity of it all, really, of not seeing the main event that's being talked about and seeing kind of like the responses around it. There was a lot made of the ending of Reservoir Dogs as well, in regards shooting and how many shots, and I'm very, very spoiler light. A little bit of that ambiguity was contributed to by all I will say, without spoiling the film, there was a slight misfire of a squib at the end that just added to a tiny bit of that confusion. The film was ready to go into edit by September of 1991, and it was edited by the late great Sally Menker, and she would work with Tarantino right through until her death. And by the end of 91, Tarantino's star was rising. That there was some word of mouth to this as well. That he and Lawrence Bender had formed a production company called A Band Apart, but also an early screening ahead of festival debut and things like that had gone well, that there was real word of mouth. And Danny DeVito and Stacey Sher were running a company called Jersey Films, and they wanted to get to Tarantino fast. They duly did so. And by December 1991, with Reservoir Dogs still a long way away from a wide release in the US, Jersey Films had inked a deal with Tarantino for his next picture, which would become Pulp Fiction. For Reservoir Dogs, though, let's go back to that. It debuted at the Sundance Film Festival on January the 21st, 1992, and it went into that festival with word of mouth already building on the movie, that there was a feeling this is going to be the hit of the festival. It's going to walk out with loads of awards, that there'd been reports of an early screening that had just fueled interest in the movie, just an industry screening. And Tarantino went to Sundance with an inkling there might be awards coming my way. This is my debut as a director. Sold script at this point. True Romance had sold. But, he might have thought that there were awards coming. He might have been told there were awards coming. Awards at this stage were not coming at all. Walked out of Sundance empty-handed and with some very, very divisive responses to the film. That Sundance premiere, and I go very, very spoiler light again, and so there is a sequence involving an ear where you don't see anywhere near as much as you think you see. Again, you could do that on that kind of budget. The reviews coming out of Sundance, well, originally they were good. Some of them were really, really, really good. Some of them were very, very pushed back on the violence of it. Tarantino's writing and the conversations in his characters, they came in for some praise. But, people like Roger Ebert, who were reviewing at that point, weren't going head over heels for the film. And the violence was coming in already for a lot of trouble. I think Wes Craven gave an interview where he said he watched the film and walked out. Just a month or two later, really liked Tarantino, but just couldn't handle the violence. It's the Bambi effect is the interesting thing with Reservoir Dogs. It always was that it's what you don't see and what you're feeling. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first Saw film, far less violent than you think, but it's your brain filling in the gaps. And as such, that kind of contributes to the legend a little bit. what happened off the back of Sundance? I mean, it had secured US distribution. That was a big key thing. That I think it was Miramax putting it out in the US. Here in the UK, it was snapped up by Polygram, and Polygram is we're coming to, because boy, did it have a bit of a battle with the film. And so it was in October 1992 that it gets its release in US cinemas. It's not made it to the UK yet. And there's a big Seattle Times interview I tracked down where Tarantino's addressing the fact that people are walking out of the film. And it had screened a few times at this point. And he just said it happens at every single screening. For some people, the violence or the rudeness of the language is a mountain they can't climb, he said. And he said, that's okay. It's not their cup of tea, but I am affecting them. I wanted that scene, you know what scene, to be disturbing. But there was some analysis in some of the reports at the time that were making the note. It wasn't actually as graphic as you think. But still, I mean, for all the noise that had been made about Reservoir Dogs, it was released by Miramax on 19 screens in the US on the weekend of the 23rd to the 25th of October. Its screen average was $7,781, not the highest in the chart. And the highest in the chart that week went to the Robert Redford directed film A River Runs Through It, which was playing on more screens, playing on 130 screens and doing a $12,000 screen average. There wasn't the point I'm trying to make, there wasn't an early sign that Reservoir Dogs was about to catch fire, that it picks up $147,000 on its opening weekend. Again, a limited platform release. The plan wasn't it was going to go onto 2,000 screens straight away. On its second weekend, it went up to 61 screens, but the screen average dropped to $3,500. The Lover was on 8 screens, which, I mean, a lot of controversy around that film at the time. Had a screen average of $22,000. A River Runs Through It was on nearly 800. Its screen average was higher as well. And so you go to week 3, and Reservoir Dogs interest in it is waning. You know, the screen count on its third week went down slightly. The box office was down 20%. And, I mean, it was just trickling out of cinemas. In fact, you go to the initial US release of the film. What did it do? About $2 million at the US box office. It didn't do much at all. And so ordinarily, I mean, cinema is awash with acclaimed independent films that make a noise and then kind of disappear. What I believe, that other opinions are available, what really helped ignite Reservoir Dogs was what happened to it here in the UK. So let's go forward to the start of 1993 when, and this is where it all just starts to, the legend starts to build, that in January 93, Reservoir Dogs got its release in UK cinemas. It got some terrific reviews as well, and it passed uncut. No, there wasn't any mad controversy beyond here's that violent film that people in America were talking about. But it went through, went uncut, did decent money at UK cinemas, but nothing to send it into the stratosphere. It was when the video release came around, though, that really things took hold. Now, there's a really tragic and horrific backdrop to what was going on around the conversations of video releases in the UK in 1993. The murder of a small boy, James Bolger, and important I say his name, a really horrific crime, and the UK tabloids at that point were vehement about linking this to videos and to films. In particular, there's a film called Child's Play 3 that was put on the front page of one of the UK newspapers, and that was said to have been this big influence on this horrific crime. What it brought into focus, though, was certainly the conversation that the tabloids brought up was the violence that was available on videos that people could get in the home. There was a Belgian film around at the same time called Man Bites Dog, a really horrific film. But because that was subtitled and a very, very small audience, that sort of got through. But it was mentioned a lot of times, but went through uncut, I believe. Reservoir Dogs, though, had this scene that was being heavily talked about, that involves an ear. And as much as it had got through uncut on a cinema release, the video release was now going to be slightly different, because James Furman was the head of the British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC here in the UK, give films a certificate, and he was now minded to clamp down on violence in videos. There's a Video Recording Act in 1984 and the whole video nasties era you can read about in the UK as well, that had seen lots of films. Ken Russell's The Devils, you still can't get uncut here in the UK, for instance, as a result of that 1984 Act. Lots of films were not available in the home, or certainly it took a long time for them to become available in the home. But Polygram didn't know all this was necessarily lying ahead at this point. It submitted the video for certification as usual, but it was advised that a decision would be delayed. It wasn't told you weren't going to get a certificate. It was told the decision is going to be delayed. It's really important to note that the movie was not banned. It was never banned. In much the same way Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange wasn't banned. It was a case of Kubrick withdrew that film. In the case of Reservoir Dogs, it was in limbo while the BBFC was addressing the Video Recordings Act, and the government was as well, and working out what to do with this film. In the end, there were changes made in Parliament. I think it was the Criminal Justice and Public Order Bill was introduced in 1993 in Parliament. This would make amendments to the 1984 Video Recordings Act under the then Conservative government of John Major was Prime Minister at that point. And the changes to the Video Recordings Act came in 1994 as well. So all of this time while legislation and changes were going through, Reservoir Dogs was sat in limbo. So we're already like a year-ish along the line. But what was happening was Polygram was reaping some degree of benefit of that, because word of mouth hadn't stopped spreading about Reservoir Dogs, and reports had been popping up, and Empire magazine, in fairness, really banged the drum on this, that you couldn't get it on video. It's just like, there's nothing that inclines people more to watch a film than being told they can't watch a film. And so Reservoir Dogs, demand for it in cinemas started to rise. And rise and rise. In fact, in the end, it got a full theatrical re-release in the UK in 94. But the bit that really saw it started to bubble up was the midnight screenings that started happening. So I live in Birmingham in the UK. Every Friday, Saturday night, alongside The Exorcist, which you also couldn't get on video at the time, there was a midnight screening of Reservoir Dogs. And then another one. They're popping up around the UK. And the conversation around the film was, it's almost like this thing you weren't supposed to be able to see. Well, I've seen it. Have you seen it? And the word of mouth started to build. And this cult following that I think went slightly beyond a cult following was building up. Interest in the film was going up as well. Interest in the soundtrack was also soaring at this point. That Tarantino's soundtrack to Reservoir Dogs included clips of dialogue for the film. Well, people weren't really doing that, were they? Not usually. He'd do it again in Pulp Fiction, of course. But in Reservoir Dogs, it's just like, oh, okay. And also the jukebox in Reservoir Dogs, full of tunes that suddenly found themselves back in the public consciousness as a result of the film. And so it got this fast track way, really, to, again, just slightly beyond cult status. Helped too by the fact that in America, you could buy it on video. You could buy it on Laserdisc. And that was crucial in America. I'm not condoning this. It was just one of those things that because there was a Laserdisc available, that meant high quality counterfeit copies of Reservoir Dogs were being sold in the UK that had been ripped. It wasn't ripped in those days, but were taken from the Laserdisc source. So it wasn't the back of the head in someone's cinema. There was actually a decent source to the picture. And there was something about watching an illicit copy of this film that the BBFC wouldn't let you have. So went the story on video in the UK. Polygram, it must have wished it could have got the film stuck for a little bit longer. But eventually the fresh legislation came through in 1994. And the video release of Reservoir Dogs would be not too far behind. It's worth noting, though, that True Romance jumped the queue, that Warner Brothers had backed True Romance, directed by Tony Scott. And Tony Scott had famously changed the chronology of the screenplay. And, True Romance is a great film. But Warner Brothers, when it was putting True Romance out in the video to buy market, stickers on the front, the first Tarantino available to buy. The Tarantino effect was rippling as well, even while all of this contention with Reservoir Dogs was going on, because in 1994, Pulp Fiction comes out. And for a while, there was like, are you going to be able to buy Pulp Fiction on video in the UK? And so, two films, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, two films people were desperately wanting to see, both huge successes. Tarantino, studios then, it's just like, what Tarantino scripts have we got? And so not only does Pulp Fiction go through, Warner Brothers puts True Romance through. Oliver Stone picks up Natural Born Killers. I'm going to tell that story another time. pretty much guts the script, whole of the tale behind that. Tarantino's hired to do script write on Crimson Tide. He'd done a little bit of script rewriting as well, and he was the name on Hollywood's lips. And part of that myth came from, or certainly part of that legend came from, the fact that the UK had helped really ignite interest in the film. This movie you wanted to see, but you couldn't see. And it's almost an anticlimax in the end when the film then comes out on video in May of 1995. Pulp Fiction also comes out on video. And, you know, the story almost comes to an end, apart from the fact that, I mean, the old cliche, the genie's out the bottle. And so Tarantino's career is launched. There was nearly a neat ending to this story as well, in that Tarantino, at the point I'm recording, has not decided what his 10th and final film as director will be, 11th if you count Kill Bill as 2 films. But he's stuck himself to this rule that he's only going to direct 10 films. As he told Screen Rant, I think it was in 2021, there was a little bit of time where he considered, for his final film, doing a remake of Reservoir Dogs, perhaps with a bit more resources. But as he worked out, it's just like, why on earth do I need to do that? Launched his career, launched this aura around him as well, and didn't half help the sale of pirate videos in the UK.